Kia ora koutou, Territory 3 community. It's great to have you here on a Wednesday for a change instead of a Thursday. Really appreciate your time and very excited to have with me today Wayne Norrie. And Wayne's going to do a little bit of an intro of all the things he's been involved in over the years. We were just reflecting on when I first met him, and it's got to be, well, probably we won't disclose, Wayne, how many years ago, but great to have you here, Wayne.
Thank you. Thank you.
So as you know, the format is really about you, the community watching this. So we have question and answer session functionality on Zoom. You can ask a question there, and we will stop at about 30 minutes to make sure we get through those questions, and again about 10 minutes before the time. Big shout out to our sponsors, AWS, Bank of New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. So without them we couldn't be here today. And Wayne, it would be great to have you maybe give us a little bit of intro of what you've been up to over the last few decades.
Well, yeah, thank you, John, and morena everybody, kia ora koutou. I suppose the quick flyby for my own career, I suppose, was dropped out of school at an early age and went off to Canada to be a ski bum. And then I had a wise Uncle Doug. I think everyone should have a wise uncle. I don't think we leverage our elders enough, to be honest, who, this is in the mid-70s, said, get into computers. All the future is in computers. So at a very early age, 45 odd years ago, sort of got into that, did a computer science degree, and then just wandered around the world, actually just doing a lot of contracting. Did some really cool projects, actually put in New Zealand's first ATM and FPOS system, and then did a global container tracking system with General Electric with 4 satellites. So here I was at a early age coding satellites and tracking 70% of the world's containers. And then got back to New Zealand and was working for Hitachi Data Systems and had this sort of epiphany. I truly believe that when we have a vision, that's when the best companies are born, really. And the vision was we were selling mainframe computers and mainframe storage systems. And after Y2K and everyone spent their hardware for 5 years, no one was buying them in New Zealand, and they were going to shut us down and run it out of Sydney. And I just suddenly thought, instead of taking the computer to the customer who can't really afford it, why don't we bring lots of customers to the computer and just share it? And the functionality of those top-end systems were brilliant to be multi-tenanted. So that was, what we now call cloud. And I just sort of bet the bank on saying, we can do this, and created Revera, which basically became a big chunk of New Zealand cloud. And after an 11-year sprint, ran out of puff and ran out of balance sheet and ran out of money, and Spark came along and waved a big check. So me and my business partner said, yep, that'll do. And then you enter that give back phase. I think we all do. So, you give back in a way where you can help those who've come in behind you. And that's through investment, through mentoring, through Beachheads initially to share those lessons, and then NZTE board and doing some speaking and those sorts of things. So, and that allowed me to live back in sunny Hawke's Bay, where I was born and my wife was born. And now we look after our elderly parents. So it's kind of like full circle, I guess. Very cool, very cool. And the background has been already commented on in the notes. Now that's obviously not the Hawke's Bay, is it? No, not the Hawke's Bay on a cold day. No, we I had the privilege of going down south this year. So that's out of Wanaka. We did some skiing, and one of my dream bucket list things was to go heli skiing with my son. So that's a heli skiing day we had pretty much above the Minaret Station, the Minaret Ranges, I think they call it. So yeah, we had a magic day down there. So the south still has it. Very cool, very cool. Now, you mentioned Revera, and I'm sure a number of our founders have not been familiar with that story. And I certainly watched your team drive through, the ups and downs of essentially building a business. Quite an interesting starting point coming and approaching, the HDS side, and then moving that corporate out to one side and starting your own thing. 11 years, I think that's always the 11-year overnight success, or 7 years or whatever it is. What are your, when you think back to putting your founder hat on and working that idea through to an exit with Spark, what are the reflections, I guess, in terms of the positives and negatives that you'd share with us today about building a business like that? Yeah, well, there's probably a couple of key things. Is first of all, really understand the why, right? Because when I sort of saw that opportunity, the what you have to give up to chase that dream is enormous. And if you don't understand your why, between you and anything worth achieving, there's a lot of obstacles and a lot of hurdles. And you've got to gather a group of people to help you get there. And when you hit some of those hurdles, it's really easy to give up or pass on. So I always say the difference between a successful entrepreneur and and a failed entrepreneur is a successful entrepreneur gets up one last time. It's not that there's an easy road anywhere. So we embarked on pretty much, which was pretty much a dream. And you have to mortgage everything, your kids, your dog, your parents, everything that you can touch, and head off on this journey really. And it was pretty hard. I mean, we pretty much nearly lost the company 3 times, and we had people around us who could save us. And that's where I truly believe in a good board, because without a good board, we definitely wouldn't have had the end that we had. It would have been a terrible end. But there was. And so, for me, the why was actually around personal leadership. I happened to, my mother died of lung cancer, and we were all there when she passed. And her last words were, "Be all that you can be." And when I said to my wife, "We're going to risk everything to do this," her view was, "Well, why?" It wasn't money or fame or fortune, because, the sad thing is when you're in the tech sector, you get paid quite well. And it's sad in that it's easy to stay inside your comfort cave, and you can only realize your full potential when you go outside your comfort cave. And I thought the rocking chair test for me was that I couldn't live with myself. I was too scared to try to see what I could see was, a logical opportunity. So she, on the start line, said something very wise and very clever. She says, "If this works, you must never say, 'I told you so.' And if this fails, I will never say, 'I told you so.'" And so, 3/4 of the way along, one day I came back and I said, "Kath, I've tried everything. It's all up. We're going to lose the house, the cars, everything next week." There was no way we could make ends meet. And actually, a funny story. She next day, she came back with all these new clothes, and I said, "What are you doing? We couldn't pay the mortgage. We hadn't paid it in months. Couldn't pay any bills." And she says, "I've worked out that next week the bank are going to take my house, and the bank are going to take my car, but I'm going to walk out of here well dressed with my head up high."
Everything on red, eh?
Everything on red, yeah. So, and then that's the benefit of a good board. One of our directors, he sort of came out of the blue with literally no backing. We had no more equity to share or give, and he just put in a pot of cash that got us through that last dip, and got us through that last little hurdle. So, they spent a lot of time helping us get through that, and then ultimately, it logically came together. We made the government panel, and a lot of people said, "Well, how did such a small company outperform all the big guys who were getting into cloud?" And largely it was, I think, because we had a clean sheet of paper and a fresh perspective. And I think legacy can sometimes be an anchor, because all the big players like, IBM and EDS and Unisys and Fujitsu and even HP, they all had data centers that was a shared building, but with customer equipment inside it. And it was hard to take customer equipment and share it because they didn't really own it. Whereas we built ours shared from day one. So we built a bus. We designed and built a bus to be shared, and they tried to bolt together a fleet of taxis. And that was always clunky and it was always inefficient. And, when we started winning all our deals on the government panel, in fact, we thought we'd win, if we won 1% of them, because it was just us, Datacom and IBM initially on that government panel. And then we started winning a few, and then I thought, well, maybe we won a 3, we could win a 3rd. And then after the first 30 deals, I think the score was Revera 27, Datacom 3, and IBM 0. So Spark said, "Well, we better take you out," and that's kind of what happened, really. So it was scary. So a couple of key lessons: understand the why, get a good board around you. I'm an absolute believer in that. One of the lessons we commonly see through NZTE is the lack of people who can shine light on the future. There's also just a lot of people who read the dashboard that you're reading, and mobilize the team. You've got to have people help you get there. And we went in our first year of Revera, we went from the bottom of the best places to work survey to the top inside 12 months. And it was our culture, I believe, that got us there. So clear strategy, understand how hard you're going to go through these obstacles, and get the most out of your people.
Fantastic advice there, Wayne. And it's sort of a nice segue into Online Republic, which you were on. I think you chaired there.
Yeah.
And so again, a great exit story that a lot of our founders who are a bit younger than us might not be familiar with. But just bringing into play, a little reflection on that, as well as the director role, because I think you raised something really important, with 2 dimensions. One is, there's founders looking at this webinar today from their seat, but they also generally have a director seat as well. So you moved to Online Republic, director role, sort of flipping from the Revera side of things. What are your thoughts and reflections at a governance level on that?
Yeah, and that was and I've seen several like this as well. You come along when it was all shareholder directors, and they were all tired and they all wanted some money off the table, and they were probably about to settle for something that was pretty suboptimal, to be honest. And they were, help us get this deal across the line. And by the time I got to understand the company, I said, it's worth way more than this. Are you prepared to give it another lap, so to speak? So we did a few things. We tightened up the strategy. We got in a new CEO. We got in a new CFO, and that was key. Actually, I've done that several times now. Often the owner manager is the CEO, and they're tired, and they just want to get some money off the table and get out. I think you can do that without selling all of it. I'm a great believer to say, if you're tired, bring someone else fresh in, and bring some money in to allow you to get some money off the table and de-risk it. But don't get out too early just because you're tired and sick of it. And so we did another lap, and then 3 years later we sold it for about twice what they were going to settle for. Sort of 3 years earlier. So that's the benefit of fresh eyes, fresh perspective. Some outside-in thinking, and moving away from, it's kind of a race, and you hold your breath for as long as you can, and when you run out of breath, you sell. I actually think you can bring somebody else in, you can get some money off the table and just go a bit further. I think sometimes we sell a little bit too early.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm sort of sitting here thinking of my own experience of sort of thinking about that CEO founder role and then when to flip. I mean, what are the insights or the indicators, from your perspective, with a lot of founders probably thinking about the same sort of journey, to say, it's time to hand over to someone fresher, or, as you say, with different eyes from a CEO point of view.
Yeah, I think the first thing is realizing that you can. There's two other companies where I've done this now. Sort of joined the board of a company, and initially I said no, and then why not? And I said, because it's a nice family friendly company. It's your playpen, it's your company, you're the boss. It's all built around you. I says I can't add a lot of value to that, but there's opportunity costs there. If you want it to be a more serious company, then I can help you. And it was about 3 years later, he came along and said, yeah, I'm ready for it to be a more serious company. And I said, okay, well, sort of two conditions. He says, what's that? He says, well, we can't just keep peeling all the money out in dividends. If you're going to grow, you need cash. And what's the second condition? I says, well, you're not the CEO. Often the owner founder is not the best CEO. And so we transitioned that. And again, 3 years later, that company's doubled in size. So they sort of get their wealth as well. I think it's realizing that because you had the vision to start the company, very few people can take it from zero to hero. You just got to understand that between zero and hero, there's probably 3 CEOs, not one. So the first thing is let your ego accept that, right? Because there's the sense of, I should be capable. The other is to realize that no matter what, everybody gets tired and every wood for the trees. You just suddenly can't see things anymore. And, it's just not the same. So the risk of getting in a new CEO scares people, and they say, can I find a pilot who's better than me, or can I find someone who'll run it better than me? You can de-risk that, but again, use some outside people to help you with that. Never do that on your own. And then thirdly, work out as an owner. One of the things I do is I go down, what's your perfect job? Put down on a sheet of paper all the things you love doing and all the things you don't like doing. And I'd almost guarantee that 50% of their job is the things they don't like doing. And that is an anchor on the company. When you take the owner manager or owner founder and you put them into a job description that is only the things they love doing, the benefit and the boost to that company is huge. And find someone else to do the other stuff. You've earned the right to do that. You've earned the right to do the job you want to do, not the job you have to do. So be really conscious of letting go of the stuff you don't like doing, because by definition, you will not be good at it and it will not get done properly. And then that liberates you to be excited again. And that gives you enough time for another lap.
Very cool. Very cool. And I sort of boil that back and the word aspiration comes to my mind in terms of, your point around founder aspiration, what do they really want this company to be, and setting that really high. But then I think it takes us quite nicely into going global, because we are a small market in a small country. The NZTE journey, in fact, I think that's where I first met you, presenting as a fresh-faced young founder in a little company called Sonar 6. In fact, I think it was called TMS at that time. We hadn't even named it properly, and you were leading up a really cool initiative, which is still going to this day, around NZTE helping people go global. Love to hear some reflections on that.
Yeah, that was the Beachheads program, which does still run today. But very similar to Territory 3, you're explaining the different phases of Territory 3. Beachheads has sort of gone through 3 similar evolutions. In the early days, it was just, it was like the landing pad, really. It was just an address, shared phone, desk, that sort of stuff in London and New York and all these expensive places. And then it moved from there to, that's a marginal value add, to opening up networks. So when you land in a new geography, open up networks. And then what we found with that was that we'd open up these networks, but the networks were being damaged because these companies had some serious issues, and probably they needed to solve those issues before they left home. So the next phase was, well, how do we help you, how do we help go overseas and pack correctly and be ready for what's happening overseas? So that was coupled with an awareness by NZTE that, people who have done it are critical to this. So the Beachheads program is filled with private sector folk who've done it before, got the scars on their back, and are in that giving back phase, right? Because they do it for the give back reasons. And so the Beachheads program really was, help you get ready to go and not make, the top 6 mistakes. Because after doing, I don't know, hundreds of Beachhead sessions, I sort of wrote a speech, which was, just about every company in New Zealand makes the same 6 mistakes when they go overseas. And I just thought, for a small country, this is silly. To take advantage of our size, let's just recycle these mistakes and recycle how to avoid them, so that when they go overseas, we maximize their chance to hit the ground running. And then they still have the, in-market networks, in-market mentoring, and help you accelerate your growth once you land. So that's kind of the aim of it. And it's as a program, it still is very highly rated, so working well.
Yeah, it is very cool. And say a number of my companies, and I know a number of Territory 3 members have used Beachheads very successfully to their advantage going global. So sort of bringing more of the pithy nature of the way I like to run these webinars. You've been involved in that, and it's gone through these iterations. What's the aspect that's frustrated you the most that you couldn't address, or has taken longer than you would have liked?
It's really hard for people to accept advice without having learnt the lessons personally. We can see companies from the side, and it feels brutally obvious what's going wrong, but for whatever reason, they just don't want to listen. Success is a two-edged sword. Success means I have made some decisions in the past and I've been right, and it's easy to extrapolate that into the future. So that's probably sort of been one of the frustrations. The other part was getting, if I'm honest, in the early days, NZT struggled to accept or be able to align and mobilize private sector people. That was quite a struggle for a public sector organisation to partner and align private sector people. And we had some challenges around that in the early days, and we had all these wonderful people who just were literally on the bench. They couldn't get customers to talk to. And I suppose the other part was getting Beachheads advisors there for the right reasons. We had a spell where people were there to, I wouldn't say expand their networks, get some clients for their own day job sort of thing. It's got to be for the right reasons with the right experience. And then you've got to do the matching, because not everyone is good for everyone. So you've got to be able to do the matching and those sorts of things. But largely the biggest frustration was just seeing the same mistakes being made time and time and time again. And it just, I think it's where I lost my hair.
And I think you highlight something too. I mean, so it's the lessons learned, but it's like the learning mindset that is because, we all have, especially if we set big goals, we all have an aversion to being told that something's not quite, as we see it. What would be your tips about sort of getting into that frame of mind based on the folks that you've seen in so many of these sessions and the ones that have perhaps started, clearly with an aversion to taking on that learning mindset, but have adapted and sort of moved themselves into that space quite successfully?
Yeah, I personally think it's a lot of it's around personal leadership, and a lot of it is around putting your own ego to one side. It's a lifelong journey. We're all on it, but the lowest ego folk took on some strong lessons and went the furthest. The highest ego folk just sort of shunned it all and had to learn the hard way. So I think there's a lot of self-development that needs to happen in parallel to these things, and almost you could say if you're not going to take on advice, don't seek it, because you're just wasting the time for those folk that are giving it. And if you are going to seek advice, then be prepared to act on it. Be prepared to but again, you do have to analyze. I always say beware of the financial advice from the financial advisor who lives in a caravan. The source of that advice is important as well.
I think the average salary of a financial advisor I read somewhere was about $55,000 a year. So,
which makes no sense, does it? I mean, it's not a good look.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And we've got a comment here from Mark, and I know there's a couple of questions as well, which we'll get to in a few minutes. But thanks, Mark. It's a good one. So, board members, what are the characteristics you're looking for? It says what would be your top 3 board members. I think that possibly is who they would be, but sort of maybe driving that to a more general side of things. What characteristics do you look for in bringing some people, particularly in that scenario where you're talking about a sort of a shareholder founder-led board, and it's the first few people? What are the characteristics that you think are going to set that up for the most likely success?
That's a really, really good question. For me, it's just if you move your model of governance from just sort of compliance and keeping you on track to the analogy I use, it's like when you're running your business, it's like driving a car flat out through the desert at night, and you've got these weak little headlights into the future, but you've got this really bright dashboard that you can see easily. And a board is not about reading the dashboard and telling you how to drive your car. That just drives you nuts. The board is about having a set of floodlights on the roof of the car to illuminate the holes so that you can steer around them into the future. So boards can only add value into the future. They can't add value inside the cab. So the first thing is you've got to get the folk who have some experience of that future, so that they can illuminate it. And that's where they want to play. They're not about command and control. And so, I have 3 easy questions for whether someone's got a good board or not. One is, how often do they meet? And if they meet monthly, why do boards meet monthly? I mean, that's changed a lot now, but that's because numbers come out monthly. I still don't understand why numbers come out monthly. Something to do with phases of the moon. I've never understood that. Right? So, and then, and all you do if you meet monthly is you do page turns on the numbers and the CFO report and the CEO report, which is all about the past, right? So separate from the numbers, and then have you got any independent directors? Because often it's suppliers and shareholders. So you've got to have that independence. You've got to have those right people who can play in the future. They don't have to know about your business. New Zealand is really great at building products and services to take to the world. They're very poor at designing the company that will take those products and services to the world. And boards will help you shape your company that will take your product and service to the world. They don't have to be experts in your product or service. So that's sort of something to understand as well. And make sure that each director brings something unique that you need. So whether you need, operating in global markets, whether you need, fundraising or, capital raising out in your future, whether you need, leadership or culture types, advice or guidance, or whether it's sales, advice or guidance. So make sure that, if you take knowledge as a 360-degree circle, no matter how good you are, you only know about a quarter of that. And then there's another section of that that you don't know. But 2/3 is what you don't know that you don't know. and your board is designed to shed light on that part of the circle that you don't know, if they're in the same circle as the stuff that you know, it's just frustrating and annoying. So design your board first and then seek what you want, exactly as you would hiring a person. You work out what you need, you write it all down, and then you go and try and find that person. It's the same with directors, no different.
Yeah, great. And Robert has a question. Go, Robert, around where you find CEOs. So I guess reflecting on the board's sort of obligations, hiring and firing the CEO, and always acting in the best interest of the company. But it all sort of sounds great. But the CEO role, it's a challenging one, especially in some of these innovative, fast-moving companies. What are your thoughts on where you sort of go looking for someone to replace yourself or to be?
Yeah, no, it is tough. There's no doubt. The first thing is, don't try and do it DIY. For some reason, in New Zealand's a village and we know everyone, and we're tempted to just use our own networks and our networks. But I'm a great believer of get a professional and come and help you find a CEO. And there's lots of people who specialize in it. And one of the things they'll do is they will really crisp up on what you're looking for and why. Are you looking for something that's going to grow at tenfold? Are you looking for something that's going to hold the fort and be low risk? And really analyze what you're looking for and why. And then they have much broader networks, even to the point where they go shoulder tapping if it's not in their pool. So the larger the pond that you go fishing in, the more likely you are to find the right fish. And your own personal network is usually quite small in comparison. So there are professionals who help you do this. And, if you've never hired a CEO or hired a CEO successfully, admit that you're not very good at it and find someone who has, and let professionals help you. Yes, there's a cost to it, but the cost of getting it wrong is ginormous. So it's cheap by comparison. Yeah,
100%. Another question here, Wayne, from Stephen Westwood. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for switching it over from the chat to the question. Beautiful. And it's, what are some of the mistakes that Kiwi tech companies keep making when they go international?
Yeah, the top six. So the first is that governance one. They usually don't have the right board for that. You're going international, and by definition, you're probably going into an area you've never been before, you've never played before. And what is it when you go fishing in a strange spot, when you've never been there before? When you're down on the pier putting your boat in, you talk to the local fishermen, right? So why wouldn't you have a director in the territory you go hunting in? Why, they know the rules of the road, they know how it all works. So why do we have New Zealand directors on companies that go overseas? I've never quite, understood that, unless they've come back or have those experiences. So that always helps. But getting the right board around you as well. Another key one is we can operate pretty well here with what I'd call a slightly broad strategy. But large mature markets, they can be tough, they can be competitive. There's no easy wins. And to get cut through, you've got to have a laser-like strategy. So a broad strategy will not get you there, either on your target market or the value proposition you're taking to that market. So you've really got to hone up what your value proposition is and get it very, very narrow, very, very sharp, and then you will get great cut through. And sometimes that's trimming your market. We had one company that was going to the UK, to London. They thought that was narrow. Financial sector in London. And, and the local guy said, no, that's too broad, come back. And they said, okay, we're going to do insurance companies in London. They said, no. And they ended up selecting university registries, and they just got an awesome cut through, because I actually think we forget, the great lesson around tipping point. So if you pick a market and narrow it as much as you can, when you reach 14 to 16% market share, suddenly the customers come to you. And too often Kiwi companies, don't reach that tipping point, and then they go somewhere else because there's some low-hanging fruit somewhere else, and we end up being a mile wide and an inch deep, as we all like to say. So, I think that's absolutely key one as well. There's certainly others, the go-to-market model. We don't do enough market validation and work out how to penetrate that market, whether it's directly or through distributors or through, which geography we're in as well. So NZTE have really good market validation funding to help you get really narrow and really tight on that. And if you get that right, you vastly increase your chances of getting the rest right.
Yeah, I sort of feel like the resources, from what I've heard when they have been engaged in NZTE, and just the fact they're right across the globe, are still underutilised. Do you have any perspective on that?
I would agree with that. And one of the things we've been really struggling with, it's interesting, so that the NPS of the customers we play with is really high, And we do play with a lot of customers. We tend to play with smaller companies. I don't know if people think we play with big customers only, but we actually play with quite small companies. And one of the things we've been putting a lot of effort into is this recycling of lessons learned. And we've realized that there's only limited capacity to do that one-on-one. So they've put enormous effort into digitizing all of these lessons and making them available to everyone. And that's through a thing called My NZTE. And so My NZTE is just a knowledge bank of 30 years of lessons learned. And we're focused really hard on being really specific about lessons learned. You know, for instance, someone says, "Oh, it took me longer to get, authority for my product than I thought." Well, that's not a lesson. You know, did it take 6 months or 6 years? You know, or finding someone was harder than I thought. You know, well, what was the lesson there? How did you find someone? What did you have to pay? So we're trying to get really specific about the lessons learned, but it's now widely available to almost everybody. And the number of users we got on My NZTE is really low. So there's a bank of gold in there that is freely available, and we're struggling to attract people to it.
Yeah, totally. And if I can sort of throw in some knowledge with us, and been in partnership with NZTE for 11 years now with Territory 3, I think a lot of founders, very quick to sort of point the finger about not getting value, but they haven't actually done the prep or the work with a lot of those resources before they actually engage with the people. And you can only help people who are well prepared, right?
Yeah, and to be honest, it's the unprepared ones too that are we'd like to help the most. Really, it's I just think that as a nation, we sort of punch above our weight. But the one thing we have to do is recycle the lessons so that more of us do that.
Yeah, totally. Josh Ford, g'day Josh, has a question about, this is a doozy. How can you find support for developing commercial skills within your people and systematizing that? Business development feels hard to source within New Zealand.
Yeah, that's a key thing. So if I guess it depends on whether you're business development in New Zealand for New Zealand or business development overseas, right? So I'll speak to the overseas part. One of the things that when you go overseas is one of the things you can't do is operate the way we do in New Zealand. That's probably another common mistake. Like it's quite easy to sell stuff in New Zealand because it's a village. There's only 2 degrees of separation, so we all have a direct model. Very few people use an indirect model in New Zealand because the market's so small. But when you go overseas, you kind of don't have that time to develop those relationships. At the end of the day, you've got to remember that business is always about relationships. First a relationship, then they have a need, then you have a solution, and that's still the basics. So to fast track those relationships, you use an indirect model, and a lot of the time, we select the wrong people on that indirect model. So you'll find a partner who likes your goods, and we sign them all up, and we come back to New Zealand and we wait for the orders to come, but they just don't come through because we don't understand how that partner's incenting their salespeople. If there's not enough margin in it, they ain't going to sell it. Or if your product is one of 100 products, they ain't going to sell it. Or they say they own this market, and everyone says that. One of the things I always like to say is go and talk to your prospective customers and say, if you were to buy my product or service, who would you buy it from?
Yeah,
get the customer's view, not the indirect agency's view. And of course, they get frustrated with that. So then they say, okay, I'm going to have a direct model. I'm going to have my own salespeople. And we turn up in market and we try and hire the best salesperson. But actually, instead of hiring the king, we can't afford that. So, we think, well, I can't afford the king. I'll hire the prince. But what we don't know is that, everyone local knows it's the court jester. So we hire a bad salesperson who blames everything else, blames the product, the exchange rates, the competition, the market, or whatever. 5 or 6 years goes by and you've just lost a whole lot of money, and sometimes you cripple the parent company. So again, I'm a great believer of work out what your model is, and NZTE offers a lot of help on that. And if it's an indirect model, get really clear about how to choose one, because often we aren't experienced in it because in New Zealand we haven't had to do it. So it's not as straightforward as people think. Or if you are going to have a direct model, again, I highly advise of get local outside-in advice. Beachheads program's good for that, and local outside-in recruitment folk. So spend more upfront to get the right person. Too often we hire the wrong person because it's all we can afford. You're better off not hiring them at all. So use professionals, both to help you select and find.
100%. And that sort of brings us, I think, to the fuel question, you know, in terms of doing these things badly or hiring someone and then running out of fuel. So the big investment question. I mean, you've raised a bunch of money directly and indirectly over the years. The 101 of investment, you know, maybe the top 3 things to do and top 3 things not to do. How do you think about that as a founder in reflection?
Yeah, when I first went and raised money, I had my lens on rather the investor's lens on, and I could see what was obvious, but others can't see it. In fact, they're looking for different things. They're looking for, you know, what do I get back? How capable are you of delivering that? You know, how real is the need and how good is the solution? You know, can you reach it? So I'm a great believer that if you have a good company and a good opportunity and you package it right, there's always been money. You know, if you talk to companies saying, oh, there's not enough money around, I can't raise capital, and then you talk to all the investors and say there's not enough opportunities around, got plenty of money to spend, you say, well, you know, what's the gap? You know, so a lot of people have helped bridge that now and help people with pitch decks and all those sorts of things. I mean, the world's awash with money right now, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, if you're not able to raise capital, either you're not pitching right, get some pitch help, you're telling your story incorrectly, you're telling it from your perspective or from your product's perspective. Investors aren't interested in products, they're interested in a business that can make a return. And so you might have the best shaped product, but if it's in the worst shaped business, it's not investable. So get some help around that. Or, you know, you haven't got a business that's worth investing in, and you have to do some things to fix that up. But either way, again, get some external perspective. I went in with my own perspective. I was convinced I was investable and struggled for a while. So, you know, there's some nice, what do we call it? Tough love that you got to get around that investing path, you know. Yeah,
100%, because it's going to hit you anyway, isn't it? As you say, and just not connecting the dots and getting some cash.
Yeah, and you know, get enough. You know, too often there's one company I've invested in, and she's forever coming back with, you know, it seems that she only gets enough cash to go 3 months, and she's out there again. You know, it's like one of the things about capital raising is you take your best person almost out of play 100% with never-ending capital raise rounds.
Yeah,
and you know, a key resource is on the sideline. It's like putting, you know, the captain of the team on the bench. Just it hurts the team.
Yeah, 100%. And that sort of brings us, I think, to a really key founder perspective, particularly over the last couple of years, because it's not just been in terms of stresses and struggles about just raising capital. It's just been this whole shifting market, you know, both personally and professionally. So we always like to have a sort of a wellness lens on this. You know, what would be your insights from both sides of the table, really, founder and director, around keeping everybody well?
Yeah, again, I'd really good question, John. Thank you. It's for me, it's just us being honest about this. You know, we had a real push of this inside NZTE, and one of the senior people just sort of came up in a team webinar about, you know, his struggles with mental wellness and his health and his challenges, and these things go back to, you know, often in our early days. You know, everybody knows somebody, usually close to them, that has had a challenge with anxiety or depression or all of these things. And it's the most untalked about subject. So the first step is to just start talking about it. Right? Let's normalize it rather than it's abnormal, right? Because in our society, it is quite normal. You know, we all know our male suicide rates for teenage kids is just horrific. So, you know, it's right. So the first question is really create a culture around people can talk about it with no stigma. You know, let's take it out of the back rooms into the front room, and then just, you know, the obvious things around support groups to build around it. And, you know, there's external professional parties you've got to make available to people as well. But I just think the first thing is, if your work colleagues are aware, it's amazing how they will rally around and help. So I think awareness is the first big step you can do. And to do that as a leader, you know, if it's not something that affects you, be courageous and open your heart about some other aspect that's quite personal or quite difficult to talk about. If you open your heart, your team will as well. If you remain closed and closeted, your team will as well. They will reflect how you operate. So as a leader, it's not just what we do, but it's how we do it and what we say that leads is the example for many of those who follow. So just open up and allow others to open up in a safe environment.
Yeah, great advice. Yeah, a big issue, especially at the moment. Well, always really. Moving to another question, because you've mentioned this a few times as we've been talking around culture, and David Brevner. Hey, David. So you've got out and about into the world again, which is cool. Any insights for building our culture with new employees, with more of the team having moved to remote work during COVID?
Yeah, the remote working is a real challenge, actually. And new employees, you know, I'll talk about the physical environment, and then we've got to find ways of mirroring that in a virtual environment. But I think most cultures, the biggest cultural loss is when we employ people, because we employ people only when we're flat out, and when we're flat out, we tend to just, you know, throw them in the deep end. You know, I got told this wonderful story. Actually, it's worth sharing. It takes a minute or two, but it's you know, do you when someone leaves, you know, do you put on drinks for them? I'm going, yeah. And the guy goes, well, I don't know about you. He says, it's your money, but they're leaving. He says, why don't you have a starting party? And he goes, well, what do you mean? He says, well, you know, and there's a speaker in the room. He hands up everyone who has a new employee start on a Monday, you know, and most of the hands go up. He goes, never start on a Monday. He says, you know, think about it, because you're always busy. You're always, you know, run down. And he says, you know, it's what happens when you start on a Monday is, you know, happened to me is, you know, you got the weekend, the first thing you're doing Monday morning is fire up the sales team, you know, you fire up the management team, you're busy all flat out, right? So you come in the morning and there's the new person sitting there, you know, and they've spent their entire weekend getting ready for this. They've been nervous, might even got, you know, I'll do it as the person starting as a male, might even got a new shirt or whatever. They don't know how long the transit takes, so they generally get there early. They're sitting there in reception waiting, you know, and I go past and I'm sort of going, you know, g'day, not knowing who that is. And then suddenly it's like, you know, you're supposed to spend time with them and you're too busy, you can't. And their first day is pretty much a fizzy, you know, it's kind of like you just say, oh, yeah, just learn the names of everybody and where the toilets are, and we'll get some time to get it tomorrow. So we changed all that. We just start everyone on Wednesday, and it's all sorted out. And when the person starts, John, you know, there's a big sign in for you, welcome, John, you know, and you know, you have time with them, and you've got their PC and their laptop and their sign-ons and their business cards and their phone, and everything's all sorted. And you have morning tea with everybody there, and you give them a bottle of champagne, and you put a little bit of effort into the starting party, and that adds to the culture. So how you start people is really key. Now, it's really difficult to do virtually, but again, you could mirror a lot of that virtually, you know, ensure that everyone has got time to have a cup of tea with the new person on a you know, on a Zoom call or whatever, and just share who they are, not what they do, and actually talk about openly what the values of the team are, what the culture of the team is, you know, and we would always have a cultural interview. You know, so you have a technical interview, a fit interview, and then a cultural interview. You know, make sure that culture is, if you want a good culture, you have to talk about it. And often we'll interview people thinking they will fit into the culture without actually explaining what the culture is. You know, we sort of do the fit test invisibly or silently. Be overt about what the culture is, and then on the first day, demonstrate what the culture is. Get others to talk about it. It's
That's
not something.
Cool. I mean, it's probably more important, right, to get people zooming into new team members, given they just literally don't see people in the physical.
Yeah, exactly. They'll see names on emails. If you start a new job and you see a whole lot of names on emails that are your team, and it's meaningless to you. You know, you might Google them or whatever, but it just feels cold. You know, and you know, I'm a great believer that if culture is important, then have meetings about culture. Right? Culture is a proactive thing, not a result of other activities. You know, a lot of people think having a great culture is hiring the right people, or if you have a bad culture, you throw alcohol at it until it comes right. You know, whereas I believe that you define it, you share it, you talk about it, you talk about how good is it? You know, how can we improve it? You know, what can we start doing that we're not doing, and what should we stop doing that we are doing, and is it real? Is it important? Every single person I've had these discussions with will say culture is really important. So we'll say, well, okay, you know, I mean, you spend 8 hours a day at work with your work colleagues. You know, if you've got a young child, You know, you might get up in the morning, have breakfast with them, long day at work, get home, have dinner, put them to bed. You might only spend 2 or 3 hours with your young child, but you'll spend 8, 9, 10 hours with your work colleagues. It's really important time in your life. It's the bulk of your life. So it's really important to make it exciting and an environment where you can give in a safe place. And if you get the most out of your people, you will then get the most out of your company, because we all forget that companies are only made up of people. It's not the product, it's not the buildings, it's not the data centers or the computers, it's the people. So get the most out of your company, get the most out of your people.
Yeah, 100%. And just on that, because it's a bit of a bugbear of mine, and you know, you will have seen the numbers as well around productivity. So, you know, New Zealand, OECD, sure, not necessarily just the innovation sector, but, you know, whichever way you cut it, very down the ladder in terms of productivity. You know, you mentioned before, you know, what comes out, what people apply themselves to. Any thoughts on what the kind of base cause of that is? You know, outside of it?
At a national level, with, you know, if you peel that onion a little bit more, at a national level, there's sort of agriculture and tourism sort of a big levers on, you know, at a national level, where reasonably unproductive. And then you get into manufacturing, and you know, we probably need more high-tech manufacturing, need more sort of automation. Within the tech sector, ironically, I think our productivity is pretty good. Now, I haven't seen, you know, productivity numbers, but I just know that, you know, what the anchor on that train is that, you know, we can't attract our kids into the tech sector. You know, I think that's one of our issues. So we have to go looking overseas for it. In fact, what's happening now is a lot of overseas companies are employing our folk for overseas jobs, you know, and not even relocating them. You know, my own son, you know, he lives in Whangamata, and he works for offshore companies, and a lot of that is happening as well. So I think by sector, you know, agriculture by definition is there's always going to be a challenge. Tourism is challenged. Manufacturing, we do have some high-tech manufacturing, but, you know, we've sort of got some low-tech ones as well. It's very manual, very labour-oriented. You know, horticulture with apples and picking those sorts of things. So at a national level, we come out at a low number, but I think that's because of our primary sector brings those numbers down. I think if we separated out tech and some other sectors, I think our numbers aren't too bad. Having said that, I've not looked for or sought those numbers, but that's only my view. But I just know that our tech sector is very strong and healthy. You know, I think the view from the edge is an advantage from the view from the middle, and we get to see things differently, more clearly, and think about things before we jump in. You know, we definitely have an advantage by our geography being at the edge.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective, and you know, food for thought around that tech sector actually sort of being on track. Folks, we're about 12 minutes from the finish of this. It's been a fantastic conversation. It's gone very quickly, as always. We've got one question. If you do have any other questions, please fire them in to us, and we'll endeavour to get to them before the end of the session. But Chitrang, and I think you probably covered a few of these already. Thanks, John and Wayne, for the insightful session. Wayne, do you have tips, pointers for early stage tech startups on how to go about forming governance?
Yeah, that is difficult. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I would go the way of an advisory board. You know, one of the things you got to do with private companies and startups, obviously, is you got equity to play with, but play with it carefully. Get some advice on how to play with it. A lot of people give away too much too soon, and then when they reach success, there's some bad blood there as well. The other side of that is at an early stage, if you're a formal director, there's risk. You know, there's a few directors going to court now, and a lot of people struggle with that. So an advisory board is kind of the best of both worlds. You can get really good experience, but the directors don't carry the risk. But then you've still got to make sure that you try and get the right quality. I still believe, and there's several companies that do this, that specialize in appointing directors. So don't just go and ask, you know, don't limit yourself to your own pool. I would actually engage professional people, even at a startup level, for finding a director. You'll find there's a lot of people who will do it for the give back part of their life. And this is one thing to understand. All owner founders who've had some success are happy to give back. It's in the Kiwi nature. That's how the Beachheads program worked. We went around a lot of Kiwis overseas who've done really well. You know, we're the second largest country in the world to export people. Ireland's the biggest. You know, they had 16 million people offshore from the potato famine, and they've been doing it ever since. But per capita, you know, at one stage we're still about 1 million offshore, 5 million onshore. That's about 20%. And a lot of those Kiwis have gone offshore, have done really well. And when NZTE went around and said, you know, would you help out? These extraordinary, successful, busy people to a person said yes. So don't believe that there isn't anyone out there who's not willing to help you. I believe there is. But you have to find them through an intermediary, through an agency that specializes in this. And you have to structure it so that if you're really early stage, you can de-risk it. That's when an advisory board comes into play. You generally can't afford cash. So, you know, put a little bit of equity in there without being too much and sort of strike a deal. It's worth its weight in gold, to be honest. You don't know what you don't know. And at an early stage, you haven't got the depth or the balance sheet or the resources to make too many mistakes. You know, you've got to try and avoid those potholes and steer around them rather than drive into them and try and climb out of them.
Yep, adventure, just with the A and the D, fell off somewhere down the way. So we've got a couple more questions here. Bob, g'day Bob. Many startups are losing staff to large corporates. Yes, indeed, and government departments actually, who are paying way bigger dollars. I'm a victim of this in some of my director roles than startups can afford. Very, very interested to hear your question, your answer to this one, Wayne. Any tips on how to avoid this happening?
Yeah, there's just three areas that's really hard. First is culture. Big companies are often not fun to work for. You know, we found actually in Revera, we went to the top of the best places to work survey. We found that was worth around 30,000 a year in salary. You know, because I would say to people, if you're gonna leave and go to another job, do me the honor of sharing that with me, because someone, you know, they're going to promise you their tomorrow, and someone else's tomorrow is always better than my yesterday. So at least allow me to put, you know, their tomorrow and my tomorrow on the table. I should have done it already, but if I haven't, allow me to put two tomorrows on the table, and that will equalize the playing field a little bit. And then we found that, it was the culture was quite sticky because it was really good, and it was worth about 30,000 a year before they would break away. Those that did break away found it was just horrible. I mean, human beings can only put up with shite for so long for more money. And then they would come back and say, you know what, it's a bit ugly out there. So that's the first thing, really work hard on your culture. The other thing is do the things that they can't do. So work on equity. You know, I believe employee share options are really key if you're small, and galvanize the vision and try and get some stickiness into that. And then thirdly, you lose your size as your advantage. Really understand your staff and find out what's really valuable to them. Sometimes it's just, you know, picking the kids up after school or dropping them at football, you know, and just bake a program around allowing that to happen. You know, sometimes it's social contact and they want some mates to go and do some things with and make that happen. You know, just find out what is really important to them outside of their day job and see if you can put as much of that on the table as you can. Big companies, big government departments are getting more flexible, but they have rigor and structure and bureaucracy that you don't have to have. So play to your strengths. Small is better than large in a lot of areas. We just have to look at it through that lens. Yeah,
100%, and it's hard work. But if it was easy, everybody'd be doing it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Zach, question here. Good question. Thanks, Zach. What are some trends happening overseas within company governance or structures that we should be thinking about implementing within New Zealand?
Actually, I'll get you to repeat that. But I was just looking at, there was a great text from Michael Moynihan. He's the current Beachheads chair. Yeah, about don't ask people directly to join your board. Ask them if they can recommend someone be good for the board. That's a really good tip, actually. Share that one as well. Sorry, John, I was reading that as you asked the question.
Oh, no, that's cool and a very good tip indeed. So the question from Zach was, what are some trends happening overseas within company governance or structures that we should be thinking about, in your opinion, here in New Zealand in terms of implementing?
Yeah, well, one of the big trends is, and this is related to structure, I suppose, in government, is ESG. You know, it is. I can't tell you how important it is becoming everywhere. On the back of COVID and COP26, one of the things the world has realized is that we are all connected. And because of that, we have to work together to stop the destruction of our planet. So ESG is really big now. And if you don't have a really good story to tell on that, you're going to be in trouble, even though it's not directly related to your product or service. So you have to have your own story on that. And I think that's going to hit really soon, because consumers are now demanding it. Consumers want some trust around it, not just greenwashing and all those other things. So that's a huge trend. Getting the right balance of remote and physical working is, at one end, everyone in the office. I don't think we'll ever see that again. At the other end, everyone remote. That's just too hard and adds to a lot of challenges. So you're trying to work out where you can play in that spectrum that suits your company and your size and your age and your stage. Loneliness will overtake a great job often. So just be really careful about that and try and work out what those sort of structures are. So that's a really key one. In governance, it's try not to have directors who are too busy. People have gone for a lot of name directors, and there's a lot of people out there with 10 or 12 or whatever it is boards. That's in my mind not fair for the company. If all the companies are doing well, that's fine. But when a company's not doing well, directors really climb in deep, or they should, and really help you out. So, make sure that there's bandwidth when you do select your directors. And again, design them properly and reward them as well as you can. And don't be afraid to change them if the company's gone through a new phase or you don't have a good one. A lot of people think you've got a director for life. Directors can be hired and fired like anybody else can. So, kind of act on that as well. There is a big push if you're going to get US, in-market capital. A lot of people say, in-market capital for an in-market push, and that makes sense. But in the US, they don't like using US money for a New Zealand company. So you got that challenge. Some people have got around it, and NZTE can point you to those companies. And some people haven't. They've created a US entity because it's much more investable. And in any exit, you're going to get a better multiple because it is a US company as well. So, go and talk to others who have done it before and gather those experiences. If you find yourself facing any challenge that you haven't faced before, don't work it out yourself. Ask someone and other people who have, and NZTE can easily connect you to those people.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm so glad ESG was your first answer to the question, Wayne. That was the right one in my book.
Oh, there we go.
We've got a couple of minutes to run, and you prompted me on something that I think someone like yourself needs to be asked in this before we wrap up, because I know it's something that I deal with a lot of our community members, being challenged. And that's where, from a board point of view, one or several of your directors have just, I'll cut to the chase, reached their use-by date. So, but they don't really see that. So, walk us through your advice for that situation in terms of how to approach it and sort of get it to the conclusion you need, which is then moving on.
Yeah. The first approach is just, again, treat it like moving on any staff member that's got a use by date, right? The first approach is to have a very private one-on-one. And just, I believe that if people have got a use by date, they kind of know it. They're in some degree of pain. And if they're in pain, if you're in pain, they're in pain, right? So try and have that big, honest discussion about there's pain on both sides, Second is to realize it's a relationship, and a relationship has to work for both parties to be a good relationship, right? So if it's not working for you, by definition, the relationship is not working. And talk about the relationship, not the person. Because when you let someone go, you must let them go without damaging them. It's just because something's not a good fit, it does not mean it's not a good person. And so always got to bear that in mind in your discussions. If they can't see it and they're determined to stay, then get a formal board evaluation, which is done anonymously, and the scores will come out on that person, not where you would expect them to be. And then I get an external person in who then would go around each of the directors and talk about their scores, and that person would say, listen, it's not a good fit here. Maybe you should think about it. And then finally, depending on contractually, you just have to do it with the big hard hammer. But most directors want to walk away with their reputation intact, and therefore they would want to leave early rather than later with damage. So it would have to be a very poor director who clings to the cliff, because they're going to come away with scars that they don't want.
So if I play that back, exit with honour is the approach. Hey,
Yep.
It's been marvellous chatting to you, Wayne. It's been way too long, and I know a lot of just the comments and so forth I'm already seeing here from the Territory 3 community. You've added an enormous amount of value. So thank you. It's been great talking to you, and yeah, thanks from the folks. Thanks to our sponsors for making this possible: Amazon Web Services, Bank of New Zealand, New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. Yeah, any final comments?
Just literally, thank you to John. I believe in the power of community, the fact that a whole bunch of people are coming in and sharing lessons. If New Zealand has one superpower, it's that we're small, and that superpower means we can share more easily. And it's communities like this that are hopefully getting a lot of good advice around to more people, so that we can all go off and be the nation and the companies we know we can be. So my final comment is thank you to everyone on the webinar, and John, you for making it happen. So it's been a pleasure to chat.
Pleasure, Wayne. Thanks, everybody. See you next time. Cheers.
Cheers.